Now, as we've told you before, it is shaping up to be a bad year for that Chinese economy. We're seeing yet more troubling economic data as trade talks with the United States forge ahead. The PMI index on Chinese manufacturing showed the sector contracted for a second straight month. It's at its lowest now in nearly 3 years. Those figures will add to fears that Chinese growth continues to slow. Joining me now is Lawrence Kuhn. He's a longtime advisor to Chinese leaders and the author of How China's Leaders Think. And we will get to your insights on that in a sec. But first, I have to ask you about some of the figures. You know, it doesn't matter if it's something like that or if it's GDP. Some people wonder what kind of an insight do we have into exactly what's going on in China when we get numbers like that.
China's a continent, and it's very difficult to get everything straight. It has provinces, has a long history of a divide between the center and all the different provinces, which are like individual countries, and in the past run by what would be the equivalent of modern-day emperors, very independent running those provinces. And if you go back historically, there were times when the GDP growth for all of the provinces, there would not be a single one below the national average. And so you know that's mathematically impossible. But today it's getting much better. The leadership is insisting on good. That doesn't mean they're perfect by any means or up to
our numbers aren't perfect, right?
So, well, yeah. but China needs to go a long way. But I think we can begin to be fairly confident in the numbers. But the numbers are not that critical. Look, here's why. Projecting a growth rate of even 6%, 6.5%. What does that mean? When China first joined the WTO in 2001, what was China's GDP at that time? It was $1.3 trillion. What is it today? It's $13 trillion.
Incredible.
And so 10 times. So how do the numbers work? When China today, put it a low number, put it at 6%. 6% of 13 trillion is 780 billion. And if you go back to the glory days when China had double-digit growth, say, make it 12%. 12% of 1.3 trillion, well, you know, what's that, 150. So China is growing arguably 4, 5 times bigger now with a smaller growth because the base is so big. That sounds good, but there are other issues involved. There's how much money is being spent on infrastructure that is not productive. And so you're creating GDP in the short term and creating problems in the long term.
A lot of those white elephants that we've seen in a lot of
overcapacity, high debt, and China's trying to deal with this. Xi Jinping has recently had a big conference with all provincial leaders, and his focus was on risk, and it was very blunt. He started with political risk because of all the turmoil going on in China and internationally. He was concerned about keeping stability and elevating the party more than any of us can remember in terms of its importance in the country to keep stability. He's focusing on completing this anti-poverty campaign, poverty alleviation, that he has focused on. He said, Xi Jinping has said that that's what he spends more time on than anything else, more time on the economy, and that's remarkable.
But I believe it because he believes that that's the way you keep the social cohesion, right? That is
delivering for the people, delivering standard of living growth.
But let's get to him, and I wonder if in that meeting they talked about things like what could be a credit or a debt bubble coming up in China. But I want to ask you about trying to get into his mind, because a lot of people are wondering now if we did not take the right measure of the man, because they thought he was a reformer, they thought he would privatize, they thought he would liberalize. Many people think that the way he's running his economy is really mirrors the way he'd like to run the social contract with everyone. And they're looking at this and thinking, we thought they would liberalize as an economy. They're not going to. They're not about to. They don't think it's the right way to go.
Let's start at fundamentals. Xi Jinping wants to deliver 2 big categories. Number 1, elevate the standard of living of the people, which embeds eliminating all extreme poverty in China. As I said he spends more time on that than anything else. That's number 1. Number 2 is the reemergence of China in the world, China playing its role as a major power, as a great power, not taking over the world, but being an equal.
You're going to get some argument on that.
I know, and I feel very confident. China wants to participate among the great nations in the global governance of the world. They may not agree exactly how they think it should be run. I think China's learning lessons with the Belt and Road. The Belt and Road is a wonderful initiative which will bring infrastructure to the poorest countries in the world. We all should support that. There are problems with it. There are debt structure problems. There are bribery problems. China is recognizing that and will correct it. China has a history of making new things, correcting it, and then expanding it forward.
And before we go, I don't have much time left, but I do want to bring it down to what we saw in Washington this week. So, you know, you wrote the book, How China's Leaders Think. how is their approach to negotiation different than the U.S. approach to negotiation?
Well, first of all, both presidents want a deal. And I think we can be very confident about that for very different reasons. Xi Jinping has the risk. He has to deliver on the economy, has many other pollution. We haven't talked about all the problems. We don't have time. It took us 3 hours to talk about all the problems. We know President Trump needs a stock market. He's going into an election, has personal problems, et cetera. So both need a deal. So I feel very confident a deal will be reached, but that doesn't mask that we have passed a point where for the midterm, however long midterm is, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, who knows, that there will be increasing competition. We hope it doesn't get worse.
Well, that's a bit sobering for going into the weekend. Thank you very much. I really appreciated the insight into the numbers. It's really important to pull back and see that perspective of that Chinese economy and how far it's come. Robert, thanks so much as we continue.
We'll keep watching.
We will indeed. It is quite a show going on right now with those trade talks as well. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Now,